Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today we'll be learning how to draft a pencil skirt pattern, and the tools I'll be needing is my marker, scissors, tape, ruler and hip cuff. So let's get started. So the first thing I'll be doing, like always, is to get my horizontal line. So I'll be starting with my waistline. Then from my waist to my hip is 8 inches. I will note it down in order to get my hip line. Then from my waist to my full length, that's where I want my skirt to stop, is 24 inches plus 2-inch seam allowance, which is 26. So I'll also note it down. And then use a ruler to connect the dots. So I have my waistline, hip line and full length where I want the skirt to stop. So I'll go ahead to impute my other measurements. The waist I'm using is 32. 32 divided by 4 is 8. 8 plus 1-inch seam allowance. 32 divided by 4 is 8 plus 1 inch for that and 2 inch for seam allowance, which is 11. Then for the hips I'm using is 40. 40 divided by 4 is 10 plus 2 seam allowance, which is 12. Note that I'm not adding the 1 inch for that, since our dart is not going to fall within the hip line. It's going to be 2 inch above the hip line. So that's that. Then for the full length, where I want the length of my skirt to stop, whatever I get on the hip line, I'm going to redot either 2 inch or 1.5 inch. It depends on what you want, but for me I will go by 1.5 inch. So on my hip line, what I have is 12. So 12 minus 1.5 is 10.5 inch. So I will note it down. And then I'll go ahead and use my hip curve to connect the dot. Then the next is to mark my dart. For my dart, I'm using my bust span. My bust span is 7.5. So 7.5 divided by 2 is 3.75. 3.75 plus 0.5 inch, which is 4.25. I added the 0.5 inch so that when I eventually take in my dart, I will have the exact 3.75. And take note that for the front panel, the dart is starting 2 inch above the hip line. So I'll note it 2 inch above the hip line. So after noting it down, I'll take 0.5 inch from both sides and then connect. So when I eventually take in my dart, I will have my accurate measurement. So the next thing I will do is to come down on my waist by 0.5 inch, and then I will connect. This allows the skirt to sit well on my waist. You know, the human body is not a straight line, so that's the reason I came down with 0.5 inches, and then I use my hip curve to connect so that the skirt will sit properly on my waist. You can see the curve line. So the next thing to do now is to get the seam allowance for the waist. Take note that I'm not making use of the straight line, I'm now making use of the curved line. So I'm trying to get the 1/2 inch seam allowance for the waist. And then I'll go ahead and use my hip curve to connect. Then I'll go ahead and cut. Please do not joke with your seam allowance. It's very important. It's very important. And while cutting, make sure you follow the line accurately. So this is what the front panel looks like. And then we go ahead to get our back panel. For the back panel, there are different ways to get it. You can either place your front panel, then give space for your zip allowance and trace, or you can go ahead and start drawing your lines all over. The only difference is that the zip allowance and the waist will be straight. You are not going to remove the 0.5 inches, and also the dart will be 1 inch above the hip line. For you to understand properly, I will go ahead and get my lines again. At least this will help you to understand more. So for the back panel, the first thing I will do is to get my zip allowance, which is 2 inches. So I'm rolling a straight line for my zip allowance. And then I'll go ahead and draw a straight line for my waistline. From my waist to my hip is 8 inches, just like I did for the front panel. So I'll also go ahead and connect. And then from my waist to the full length is 24 plus 2 inch seam allowance, which is 26 inch. So I'll also note that. And then connect with my ruler. My waistline, hip line, and full length where I want my skirt to stop. Then I'll go ahead and take my other measurements. That's for my waist, hip. Remember, for the waist I'm using 32 inch, so 32 divide by 4 plus 1 for that, and plus 2 for seam allowance. And then for the hip, 40 divide by 4, which is 10 plus 2 inch seam allowance. Then for the full length, I'm going to minus 1.5 from whatever I get from my hip line. This is basically the same thing I did for the front panel. Make sure that you start measuring from where that line is. Because the other side is your zip allowance. So start from this point here. Yes, start from that point here and then take your measurements. Then I'll go ahead and use my hip curve to connect the dots. I'll go ahead and get my dart just like I did for the front panel. My bust span is 7.5 divided by 2 is 3.75 plus 0.5 inch, which is 4.25, so I will note it down. I also note it down on my hip line, but then the dart will stop 1 inch above my hip line, so I'll use my ruler to connect it. Then I'll take 1 inch and 0.5 inch from both sides, which is a total of 1 inch, 0.5 inch from both sides, and connect, so that when I eventually take in my dart, I'll have an accurate measurement of where my dart starts, which is 3.75. So that was the reason I added the 0.5 inch earlier. Then to give it that pencil look at the back, I'm going to come down 1 inch above my hip line and mark and note it down, 1 inch above my hip line. Then I'll come at my full length because I'm trying to get that pencil look at the back of the skirt. So I'll come to my full length and go in by 1 inch. One inch, and then I will note it down with a dot, and then I'll connect the dot. This will give you that pencil look at the back. So this will give you that pencil look at the back of the skirt. And I don't want the back to be looking just normal straight like that. I want it to have that pencil look at the back. That's the center back. So that's it. This is what will give you that pencil look. So that's that. If you have any question, please let me know at the comment section. I'll be glad to answer your questions. So this is what the back panel looks like. So I'll go ahead and cut. I didn't remember to include my 1/2 inch seam allowance, so I will do that now. 0.5 seam allowance for the waist, so I'll go ahead and do that. I'm trying to note my 0.5 inch seam allowance for the waist, and I'll use my ruler to connect. So I'm through with that, so I'll continue. I'll take the dart up to meet to where the seam allowance is, and then continue with the cutting. I'm trying to get a straight line. I think I'll have to connect with my ruler, and I'll go ahead and cut. Do not joke with your seam allowance. Do not joke with your seam allowance. It's very, very important. So this is what the back panel looks like, and here is our front panel. Don't forget to note down important points on your pattern. That's for the front panel, is going to be on fold. Write out all the necessary things you need to know when cutting on your fabric or when you are trying to sew. Then I went ahead to notch the hip line. And also I also notched the hip line for the back panel. So that when cutting or sewing, I will understand better. Then for the back, I also noted down that it will be cut twice, and the front will be on fold. So that's it. We have our front panel and the back panel. If you have any question, please let me know on the comment section. I'll be glad to answer your questions. And also, if you find this video helpful, do not forget to give me a thumbs up and share with your friend. Feel free to join our Facebook group for more.